Hello everyone, welcome to Luan Ben Chinsu. Attacking Kharg Island, the largest landing operation in Iran's history by the US. Ladies and gentlemen, the world holds its breath as unprecedented military movements occur in the Gulf region. Just when Iran thought the storm had passed, a real hurricane named Operation Epic Fury is steadily approaching. Kharg Island, a small strip of land that holds the lifeline of an entire energy empire, where up to 95% of Iran's exported oil is processed, is now in the crosshairs of the most elite expeditionary force on the planet. With the gathering of the 11th and 31st Marine Expeditionary Units, along with the Sky Assassins, A-10 Warthog and Apache helicopters, Washington is setting the stage for a scenario that could completely change the situation in the Middle East. In this video, we will take a deep dive into these breathtaking developments. Why is the U.S. mobilizing more than 4,000 Marines along with the super amphibious ships USS Boxer and USS Portland to approach Iran's territorial waters? If Iran loses Kharg Island, how will its economy collapse when its main source of revenue is choked off? There are three possible scenarios. The U.S. could choose a naval blockade, an amphibious landing and occupation in the spirit of Yosemite, or flatten the entire oil infrastructure to dust. The U.S. launches the operation from the White House. President Donald Trump's contradictory messages are either a smokescreen or preparation for an all-out war. Is this a calculated political move or the prelude to the largest ground campaign in decades? The survival of the Tehran government is at stake more than ever. Iran thought that the stormy days on Kharg Island had truly come to an end. After the United States struck with thunderous blows that destroyed the entire military infrastructure, Western Hajang still reassured itself that at least the oil depots and pipelines remained intact. The flow of oil money, the only lifeline, could still continue to revive a government that was on the verge of collapse. But that false sense of peace wouldn't last long. The United States is mobilizing a large force to capture the other island. This could be the beginning of the largest ground campaign against Yizhang in decades. A devastating blow powerful enough to wipe out the Yizhang government. At present, this island is still struggling to recover from the wave of attacks that President Donald Trump declared had wiped out all military targets. Although oil extraction activities are still ongoing, what makes the Yizhang leadership tremble is not the visible ruins, but the looming threat approaching from the horizon, the United States Marine Corps. According to reports from the war zone, the USS Boxer and its amphibious ready group are leaving their base on the west coast to head straight for the Middle East. Accompanying them is the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, carrying about 2,500 elite soldiers who are ready to set foot on Yizhang territory as soon as they receive the secret order. The strength of this fleet is further reinforced by the amphibious ships USS Portland of the San Antonio class and USS Comstock of the Whidbey Island class, along with air and infantry units providing maximum firepower support for a full-scale assault. However, what truly shocked everyone is that the 11th unit is not the only force. Earlier, in mid-March, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit was also deployed from Okinawa, Japan, bringing about 2,000 troops along with modern amphibious assault ships. When these two pincers join forces in the wide Yangtze area, a force of more than 4,000 U.S. Marines will officially be present, ready for Operation Epic Way on an unprecedented scale. The preparations for this expedition are not limited to troop numbers. In the sky, the U.S. Navy's MQ-4C Triton drone are silently operating like deadly eyes. On March 20th, a Triton was spotted circling the largest oil port on Kharg Island, closely monitoring every move of Yizhang. The United States also announced it would deploy Apache helicopters and A-10 Warthog attack aircraft to the Strait of Hormuz. These killers once caused chaos in Iraq and Afghanistan, targeting fortified sites and paving the way for infantry. The echoes of history are repeating themselves, as the Marines were the first to enter Afghanistan, and now a similar scenario is being set up on Kharg Island. Why has this small island become the focal point of such a major military storm? Although it's only about 5 miles long, Kharg is the economic heart, the place where most of Iran's exported oil is processed and shipped. Holding 10% of the world's oil reserves, oil is the lifeblood that sustains the Tehran government. According to data from CBS News, this island handles between 85% and 95% of the country's crude oil exports. If this small strip of land is lost, A huge gap worth nearly $44 billion will be carved into Iran's economy at a time when they have no way back. Controlling Kharg Island is not just about hitting the opponent's wallet, but also about creating a powerful bargaining chip for the U.S. to break Iran's grip on the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has long used its ability to blockade this strait, which handles 20% of the world's oil and gas, to put pressure on the world. Now, by deploying troops right next to Iran's economic lifeline, the United States is sending a strong message that the era of Iran holding the upper hand in the Gulf may be coming to an end. By blocking cargo ships from passing through the strait, a tactic Iran mainly carries out using drones and speedboats to attack commercial vessels, Tehran is causing global price shocks and shaking the world economy. There's an undeniable fact that oil prices have now surpassed $100 per barrel, an unusual and alarming figure. This is happening because shipments through the Strait of Hormuz are being severely disrupted. When captains have every legitimate reason not to risk making their ships the next target in Iran's sights. Therefore, a simple calculation has been made. Deploying the U.S. Marine Corps along with occupying other islands would give Washington a strategic trump card to force Iran to loosen its grip on the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran wants to push the world's oil and gas supply into a deadlock, the United States can respond by taking away billions of dollars from Iran's own economy. Above all, military action on other islands, especially if ground troops are involved, would send a strong message. According to former United States Central Command Commander Joseph Votel, this message is twofold, targeting both Iran and the countries that depend on the Strait of Hormuz. In an interview on March 20, he emphasized that being present on enemy territory is not only an advantage in terms of intelligence, but also a commitment to the global energy community that the U.S. is protecting these vital infrastructures. The deployment of the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit to the Middle East to join forces with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit is a clear affirmation of that determination. However, approaching other islands in this way also poses significant challenges. Besides the direct landing option, there is another scenario that is less risky but equally effective. That is, the United States could use these expeditionary units to establish a naval blockade around other islands, cutting off Iran's oil exports. This would be a case of turning their own tactics against them, preventing merchant ships from entering or leaving the port without resorting to extreme offensive measures. With the presence of 2 amphibious-ready groups, about 6 assault warships, and carrier strike groups in the area, the United States has more than enough resources to turn another island into an isolated outpost. However, deploying warships from these strike groups could make the aircraft carriers more vulnerable to counterattacks from Iran. The idea behind a blockade is to neutralize the role of another island in Operation Epic 3 without having to face the military or political risks of landing troops ashore. The United States could argue this avoids escalating the conflict while still targeting Tehran's economic lifeline. There is a certain fairness in using a blockade to confront another blockade. However, the obvious challenge is that U.S. warships will face the risk of becoming targets for missiles and drones from Iran's coastal positions. Perhaps that's why A-10 squadrons and Apache helicopters have been deployed to the Gulf, as these sky killers are extremely effective at eliminating anti-ship missile launch sites before they can cause trouble. All current numbers and preparations are pointing toward a ground assault on another island, an option that is strongly supported by figures like Senator Lindsey Graham. He invoked the spirit of the legendary Battle of Iwo Jima to call for the forcible occupation of another island, aiming to choke off oil resources and gradually weaken the Iranian government. Although Washington has not officially confirmed a final decision, the pieces have been strategically put into place. The Pentagon is said to have drafted detailed plans for troop deployment, even as President Donald Trump uses diversionary tactics with the media to conceal his true intentions. If a ground campaign breaks out, the number of Marines deployed will certainly be more than enough to control this small strip of land. While Joseph Votel believes that only about 800 to 1,000 troops would be enough to wipe out the remaining Iranian forces, the Sunday Times argues that even the 2,200 troops of the 31st Unit might not be sufficient, depending on the extent of damage suffered by the Iranian military after the initial airstrikes. Perhaps that's why the 2nd Expeditionary Unit is on its way here. Because in war, it's better to have surplus troops than to suffer losses due to a lack of manpower. The incoming Marine warriors are all well-trained specialists for this type of operation, supported by a sophisticated intelligence network and overwhelming air power. With the coordination of artillery, armored vehicles, attack helicopters, and F-35B fighters, a powerful combined force is forming, ready to crush any final resistance on the other island. Seizing this island also carries risks similar to a naval blockade. The U.S. Marines and equipment on the other island will become fixed targets within Iran's range of fire. Even though this country's missile capability has been significantly weakened, Iran has proven that it is still capable of destroying stationary targets with its ballistic missiles. The other island is only 20 miles from Iran's coast, well within range of shore-based missile launchers, while the nearest U.S. base is more than 120 miles away. The reinforcement ships that the United States sends to the island will also have to face harassment from enemy drones and fast attack boats. However, the United States still holds absolute air superiority to deal with these threats. The A-10S and Apache helicopters in the Strait of Hormuz will serve as powerful guardians for the U.S. supply ships. For missile launches, the United States can destroy the launch sites.
Mà họ đã biết, nhưng lại khó lòng làm.
With the launchers that are still hidden until Iran officially opens fire. There is an irony here, which is that when attacking the U.S. Marines on another island, Iran also faces the risk of destroying its own oil pipeline system. Are they willing to risk it all? Is that price worth it, even if the pipelines are damaged? If the U.S. occupation has already taken away all of Iran's oil revenue? These are big questions that can only be answered if the U.S. actually lands troops ashore, a scenario that is becoming increasingly real as 2 expeditionary units are making their way toward Iran. But there is still a third option, a plan that the Marine units could support or might not even need to participate in. The U.S. could simply bomb and flatten all the infrastructure and oil facilities on the other island, turning everything into dust to avoid the troubles of a prolonged blockade or occupation. At that point, there would be no more fixed targets for Iranian missiles to aim at. According to reports from CNBC, destroying the ports and pipelines on the other island would cause Iran to lose 1,500,000 barrels of crude oil exports per day, which is the most important source of income for the country. It would take Iran many years to rebuild that infrastructure, and that's assuming they still have the capability after losing billions of dollars due to the U.S. strike. The problem would seem to be solved without the need for landing forces, but the truth is not that simple. The destruction of the island's infrastructure would push countries dependent on Iranian oil into a severe crisis. China, a major customer that buys up to 80% of Iran's oil exports, will certainly not sit idly by. In the context of rising tensions between the United States and China, Washington does not want to make things worse by destroying the island. Also, Iran might target the energy infrastructure of neighboring Gulf countries if the United States opts for total destruction. It is also possible that the United States wants to hold on to the island as a bargaining chip to force Iran into a deal from which the U.S. could benefit from the country's oil exports. That is a very tempting carrot for the Iranian government, but it will go up in smoke if bombs start falling and the oil infrastructure goes up in flames. Therefore, it is likely that the United States is only seriously considering 2 options, a blockade or a ground attack. Both require massive support from the 2 expeditionary units that are on their way to Iran, as we are witnessing. In fact, these plans are probably impossible to carry out without those forces, at least with what the United States currently has in the region. The biggest question right now is whether the 11th and 31st Marine Expeditionary Units will actually be deployed or not. Once again, President Trump has delivered conflicting messages. On March 20th, he declared that there would be no ceasefire with Iran, asserting that you can't have a ceasefire when you're wiping out the opponent. But just 1 day later, he implied that he was looking for ways to de-escalate the Epic V campaign. Sending troops to another island clearly contradicts the goal of de-escalation. By March 23, there were reports that Donald Trump claimed the United States and Iran had held talks to resolve conflicts in the Middle East, leading him to temporarily suspend threats to attack Iran's power stations for 5 days. However, the Iranian side insisted that these talks never took place. The Speaker of the Iranian parliament said this was fake news meant to manipulate oil prices. Predicting the Trump administration's next move in this maze is tough. The only thing we can be sure of is that about 2,500 more U.S. Marines are heading toward Iran, and their target is most likely another island. If the United States increases pressure through blockade, destruction, or occupation, Iran could face a financial black hole worth billions of dollars. A shock could put an end to this regime once and for all. The United States seems to be preparing to cut off Iran's last lifeline. Other islands have been attacked before, as we discussed, and that strike now takes on a whole new look as the second expeditionary unit is getting closer. In your opinion, which option will the United States choose? A risky landing and occupation, or a naval blockade to strangle Iran from afar? And if another island really collapses and the flow of oil is cut off, how high do you predict world oil prices will soar?